What if the only person who could save your life was the one nobody took seriously? Laura, a determined nurse, is hired to look after a millionaire in a vegetative state, but something doesn't add up. Why does his wife act as if he's already dead? Why do the staff whisper in the corridors? And most importantly, why does Laura feel that Daniel is trying to communicate? What begins as a simple job soon turns into a race against time, and against a woman who will do anything to keep her secrets buried. But when Daniel finally reacts, he utters only one name, and it's not his wife's. Now Laura will have to face unimaginable consequences and find out if love can really bring someone back to life. Laura stopped her motorcycle in front of the mansion's tall gates. It was her first day at her new job, and she couldn't ignore the nervousness in her stomach. The security guard at the gate, a serious-looking man with a deep voice, interrupted her before she could announce herself. "What's your name?" he asked without emotion. "Laura, nurse. I'm here to look after Daniel." He hesitated for a moment, his gaze assessing her as if trying to guess what she knew. With a slight nod, he opened the gate, allowing her to enter. Laura made her way to the main entrance of the immense mansion. The place exuded wealth, but also something darker. When the door opened, she was greeted by Sophia, an impeccable-looking woman wearing expensive clothes and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You must be the new nurse, Laura." Sophia crossed her arms, her tone cold. "Yes, ma'am. It's a pleasure to meet you." Sophia tilted her head slightly as if measuring Laura. "I hope you're not one of those sentimental nurses who raise false hopes. He's not going to wake up." Laura kept her gaze steady. "I'm here to do my job, ma'am." Sophia smiled, but there was disdain in her expression. "Good. Then don't meddle where you don't belong." Without waiting for an answer, she turned and disappeared down the corridor. Laura was led to Daniel's room by Clara, the housekeeper. The room looked more like a mausoleum than a bedroom. Daniel lay motionless on the bed, hooked up to a series of devices. His features indicated that he had once been a strong and imposing man, but now he looked like a shadow of his former self. "He's been like this for months," explained Clara. "The accident was serious, but Mrs. Sophia says he has no chance of recovering." Laura approached the bed, examining him. Her heart squeezed when she saw the signs of neglect: dry skin, unkempt nails, an unshaven face. Gently, she touched his hand. "If you're there, I'll find you." For a moment, she felt something, a tiny spasm in his fingers. She looked at Clara, who didn't seem to notice. "Let's start with a proper clean," said Laura, regaining her focus. Clara left, and Laura set to work. As she looked after Daniel, she felt as if she was trying to reach someone lost in a deep darkness. Hours later, Laura was finishing adjusting the sheets when the door opened abruptly. Sophia walked in, the heels of her shoes echoing around the room. "What are you doing?" Sophia asked, her tone laced with irritation. "I'm cleaning and looking after him, ma'am. It's part of my job." Sophia looked at Daniel, but he seemed to see little more than an inconvenience. "He doesn't need that much care. That won't change anything." Laura took a deep breath before replying. "Taking care of him with dignity is the least he deserves." Sophia let out a cold laugh. "Don't waste your time, nurse." As soon as she left the room, Laura felt the tension ease. However, something inside her told her that this woman wasn't just cold. She was hiding something else. That night, while Laura was organizing the materials in the small room she had been assigned, she heard hurried footsteps in the corridor. When she opened the door, she saw Clara with a worried expression. "Has something happened?" Laura asked. Clara hesitated before answering. "I'm not sure, but I think I heard someone moving around in Mr. Daniel's room." Laura ran to Daniel's room. When she entered, the smell of appliances dominated the air, but it seemed different. Someone had moved the breathing tubes. "Who's been here?" Laura muttered to herself, her heart racing. She adjusted the devices and approached Daniel again. She looked at him, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. Slowly, she took his hand. Are you trying to tell me something? Suddenly a low sound escaped Daniel's lips, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. Laura leaned in, trying to catch more of it. Talk to me, Daniel. If you can hear me, I'm here. The sound stopped, but Laura couldn't get the small noise out of her head. He was there somehow. She wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Laura felt a shiver run down her spine as she still held Daniel's hand. The room was silent, except for the sound of the devices monitoring his breathing. He had made a sound, she was sure of it. But was it real, or just an involuntary reflex? You're trying to come back, aren't you? She muttered. A quick knock on the door made her let go of his hand. Clara rushed in, her eyes wide. You need to get out of here, she whispered. What happened? Clara looked around before answering. Sophia doesn't want anyone spending too much time with him. If she finds out that you're trying to stimulate him, she can fire you immediately. Laura crossed her arms. Why would she do that? She should want him to get better. Clara hesitated. Things aren't so simple here. Just be careful. Laura wanted to ask more, but Clara had already left the room. The next morning, while she was preparing the materials for Daniel's daily care, she heard whispers coming from the kitchen. Moving discreetly down the corridor, she stopped behind the ajar door. The new nurse is too curious, said a man, his voice low. Sophia won't like that. What do you think happened in that accident? Asked a second voice. All I know is that he was driving, and Sophia was in the car. She got out without a scratch. Laura's heart raced. She needed to find out more about that accident. That night, when she checked Daniel's belongings, she found a broken watch in a drawer. There was an inscription on the back. Forever. L. L? His name began with L, but he doubted it was a coincidence. He took the watch and put it in his coat pocket. The next morning, Sophia entered the room unannounced. Good morning, ma'am, said Laura, keeping her composure. I want to talk to you. Laura put down the compresses she was holding and turned around. Yes, Sophia crossed her arms, appraising her. Have you settled in? Yes, ma'am. Good, ma'am. Then let's clear a few things up. She walked over to Daniel's bed and looked at him with a bored expression. I don't want you to get your hopes up. He'll never wake up. Laura kept her gaze steady. What if there is a chance? Sophia smiled coldly. You're here to look after him, not to question him. Do your job and stay out of matters that don't concern you. Laura clenched her fists, but didn't reply. Sophia left, leaving behind a strong perfume and a clear warning. That house had secrets. That night, Laura had a restless sleep. She dreamt of Daniel calling out to her, whispering something incomprehensible. She woke up with her heart racing. Something made her get up. She picked up the watch she had found and returned to Daniel's room. If you can hear me, give me a signal. She put the watch in his hand. For a moment nothing happened. Then his fingers moved, squeezing the object. Laura held her breath. Daniel. Before she could react, a noise in the hallway made her hide the watch in her pocket. Footsteps approached. The door opened and Sophia emerged. What are you doing here at this hour? Laura hid her hand behind her body. Just checking the devices. Sophia narrowed her eyes. I hope you're being efficient. Good night, Laura. She left as quickly as she came in. Laura let out a sigh. Her heart was pounding in her chest. This isn't just a job, she whispered, looking at Daniel. This is a mystery, and she was determined to solve it. Laura spent the night in bed. She couldn't stop thinking about the way Daniel had pressed his watch. That wasn't an involuntary reflex. He had reacted. The next morning, she decided to act. Clara, I need your help. Laura called out to her in the kitchen, making sure no one was around. The housekeeper hesitated. What's wrong? Laura looked around before whispering, What did Daniel like? What made him smile? Clara frowned. Why do you want to know? If he's still in there, trapped, I need to find a way to bring him back. Clara sighed. He loved horses. He grew up riding them, and he'd always wanted a Russian blue cat, but Sophia hated the idea. She said she was allergic. Laura felt a spark of hope. Thank you, Clara. That afternoon, Laura left the mansion during her break time. She used her savings to buy a cat with soft fur and bright green eyes. "You're going to be the key to all this," she murmured to the animal as she placed it in a transport box. Back at the mansion, he waited until everyone was asleep. Then, with careful steps, he took the cat to Daniel's room. She placed it on the bed, close to his chest. "Let's see if this reminds you of who you are." The cat settled down, purring. Laura watched with bated breath. Suddenly Daniel let out a sigh. His fingers moved lightly over the sheet. "My God." The cat rubbed against his arm, and then Daniel's mouth opened a little. Laura approached, her heart racing. "Daniel." It was faint, almost inaudible, but she heard it. "Law." She covered her mouth with her hand, holding back a sob. "You're waking up." But before she could celebrate, the bedroom door opened. "Sophia, what are you doing?" The woman burst in, her eyes blazing. Her gaze fell on the cat and turned to pure contempt. "Have you gone crazy? I told you I hate cats." Laura stood in front of Daniel. "He reacted. He called me." Sophia laughed sarcastically. "What a coincidence. You're the only one who heard that." Laura shuddered with anger. If only she'd paid attention to him. "Shut up!" Sophia shouted, her eyes cold. "This ends now. You're fired." Laura felt a tightness in her chest. "You can't do that." "Yes, I can. And tomorrow Daniel will be transferred." Laura's breathing became irregular. "Transferred where?" Sophia smiled. "To a place where no one can fill his head with foolish hopes." Laura was paralyzed. Her time was running out. Sophia gave her one last look of contempt and left the room, slamming the door. Laura turned to Daniel, holding his hand gently. "I'm not going to let them take you." His fingers moved again. "Laura!" Tears streamed down Laura's face. "I'm here." She needed a plan. And fast. Laura barely slept that night. Every tick of the clock was a warning that her time was running out. The next day, Daniel would be taken away, and Sophia would make sure he never had contact with her again. But Laura wouldn't allow it. In the morning, Clara rushed into the room. "Sophia is organizing the transfer. They're taking him at noon." Laura closed her eyes for a moment. Then she looked at Daniel. "We're not going to let that happen, are we?" Minutes later, Laura crossed the gates of the mansion with determined steps. Outside, a tall, robust man was waiting beside an imposing black horse. "Did you bring it?" Laura asked. The man nodded and pulled on the reins. "As we agreed, but are you sure?" She looked back at the mansion. "I am." When the clock struck 11:30, Sophia entered Daniel's room with 2 uniformed nurses. "Time to go." Laura appeared at the bedside, defiant. "He's not going anywhere." Sophia rolled her eyes. "You don't have the power to decide that." "He does." The woman laughed, sarcastically. "He can barely breathe without help." Laura approached the bed. "Daniel, listen to me. I know you're tired, but I need you. Just a little longer." Silence hung heavy in the room. Then, against all the odds, Daniel moved his hand. Sophia's eyes widened. "That's impossible." Laura smiled. "No, it's not." The sound of hooves echoed outside. The black horse that Laura had provided appeared in the garden, neighing loudly. Daniel's eyes, previously empty, shone for a moment. Then, in a tremendous effort, his mouth opened. "Laura!" Sophia staggered back. "No." Daniel spoke again, his voice hoarse but firm. "Don't. Get me out of here." Sophia's breathing quickened. "I'm your wife. You have to trust me." Daniel looked up at her. "Go. Away." The nurses exchanged glances. "Madam," he said. "That changes everything." Sophia, pale, shook her head. "He's delirious." Daniel looked at Laura. Stay with me. Laura held his hand, her eyes full of tears. Always. Sophia left the mansion that very day, and she never came back. With her out of the way, Daniel began his rehabilitation. It was a long and difficult process, but he was never alone. Months later, he was able to speak more clearly and move around with the help of a walker. One quiet evening in the garden, he held Laura's hand. "You saved me, Laura, not just my body, my soul," she smiled. "All I wanted was to bring you back." He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "What if I told you I wanted you by my side? Not as my nurse, but as my wife?" Laura's eyes widened. "Daniel," he squeezed her hand, "do you want to be more than my caregiver?" Laura's eyes filled with tears. "I've always wanted to be more." The wedding was simple, but full of emotion. Daniel, now more mobile, dedicated himself to helping other people in recovery. During an interview, he said, "Our past doesn't define us, but what we choose to do with it does." And alongside Laura, he chose to start again,